Hey guys, tonight we are stepping back, not just a little, but way back, into the highly starched, mildly humid world of Victorian England. Specifically, we're slipping into one of the most rigidly governed, yet outwardly simple rituals of the era, the Victorian tea ceremony. Now, don't picture your grandma's cozy kitchen with a chipped mug and a biscuit. Picture a glittering, over-furnished drawing room where every flicker of your eyelid, every placement of your pinky, and every whisper of conversation is under silent, yet iron-clad scrutiny. You are an honored guest, perhaps, or a nervous suitor, or maybe just a distant cousin hoping to make a good impression. And the stakes, though absurdly low in reality, feel impossibly high. You have been invited for tea, which sounds lovely and relaxing, but the truth is, you probably won't survive this social engagement without at least 3 mild, yet socially damning, faux pas. The Victorians turned drinking warm, flavored water into an Olympic sport of etiquette, and you, my friend, are about to enter the arena. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. If you're already nestled in, let me know where you are and what time it is. It's a nice way for us all to feel connected across the miles as we drift off. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You stand at the threshold of the drawing room, the air thick with the scent of beeswax and old velvet. Your host, let's call her Lady Ashworth, a woman whose smile barely reaches her eyes, grants you a minuscule nod of welcome. Already, you've hit the first hurdle: timing. Tea, you see, was not just one thing. It was 3 separate, time-defined social events, and your invitation would have subtly, or not so subtly, cued you into which one you were attending, and thus, what rules applied. Get this wrong, and you might accidentally demand a full meal when only a tiny scone was offered. The first and oldest form was afternoon tea, typically served between 4 and 5 o'clock. This was a relatively light affair, designed to bridge the huge, hungry gap between the early lunch, sometimes called luncheon, and the very late dinner, which might not be served until 8 or 9 in the evening. It was often taken standing up or seated informally in the drawing room, and was considered more of a light refreshment than a formal meal. Think of it as the historical equivalent of a corporate coffee break, but with more silk and fewer complaints about the vending machine. Then there was high tea, which is where things often get confusing for modern folk. Despite the name, this was traditionally a much less refined, heavier meal. It wasn't high, in the sense of high society, but rather high, because it was often taken sitting at the high dining room table, as opposed to the low parlor tables used for afternoon tea. This was the working class or middle class evening meal, served between 5 and 7. It featured more substantial fare meats, cheeses, pies, and, of course, tea. If you, a distinguished visitor, were invited to high tea, it often signaled a less formal, more family-oriented relationship with your host. This is a crucial distinction. Afternoon tea was social ritual, high tea was supper. Mistake one for the other, and you might find yourself either starving or stuffed, neither of which is graceful. Historians still argue whether the class distinctions in the nomenclature were fully rigid, but for your present purposes, the height of the table was your guide. But the real social Everest, the one that probably prompted your invitation, was the 5 o'clock tea, or simply the formal evening tea. By the late 19th century, this was the standard social call, running from 4 to 6 p.m., or sometimes strictly 5 to 6. This hour was a deliberate, rigid block of time carved out for receiving callers. If you arrived too early, you were rude. If you arrived too late, you were absent. The moment you step into Lady Ashworth's drawing room, every internal clock ticks with the same precise cadence. The rules for this ceremony were laid down in excruciating detail in etiquette manuals, those social Bibles of the era that dictated everything from how to sneeze quietly to the appropriate color for morning shoes. One mainstream historical fact you must internalize is that the rise of the tea ceremony coincided exactly with the rise of the Victorian middle class, who adopted and amplified the rituals of the aristocracy to signal their own refinement and gentility. Tea was their passport into polite society. Now let's talk about the structure of your visit. You cannot simply plop down and start munching a sandwich. The first few minutes are a delicate dance of seating. You are never, ever to seat yourself unless explicitly invited to do so. Lady Ashworth gestures vaguely toward a low, plush armchair, a magnificent piece of furniture that looks far more comfortable than it probably is. The key here is not comfort, but location. You must not occupy the seat nearest the tea tray. This is the sacred station of the tea hostess, the woman, almost invariably the lady of the house, who presides over the entire ritual. This simple rule is a subtle reflection of the era's gender roles. The men might manage the estate and the economy, but the woman managed the intricate, critical world of social appearance. And the tea service was her command center. It's her performance, her ritual, and you are merely an appreciative, silent audience member. You settle gingerly onto the edge of your seat, trying to avoid creating a single wrinkle in the upholstery. The room is quiet save for the distant rumble of a carriage outside, and the faint, rhythmic tick-tock of a mantel clock. This brings us to a crucial, quirky tidbit about the very atmosphere of the room's silence. While conversation was eventually the main point, the first few moments after your arrival were often defined by a quiet formality, the clatter of cups, the delicate scrape of a silver spoon. These small, high-pitched sounds of the ceremony itself became the ambient soundscape. It was considered the height of bad form to interrupt the hostess as she prepared the first cups. In fact, if the fire was lit, a common feature, even in warmer months for atmosphere and boiling water, the gentle crackle of the wood and the almost meditative sounds of the service would conspire to create a strangely hypnotic quietude. It was less about making conversation and more about observing the silent poetry of refinement. The purpose of this early phase, before the tea even touches your lips, is observation and assessment. You are gauging the quality of the silver, the cleanliness of the linens, the freshness of the flowers, and, most importantly, the effortless grace of your hostess. She, in turn, is judging your posture, your quietude, and the way you hold your gloves, which you absolutely did not remove until seated, and you now hold them delicately in your lap, or perhaps draped artfully over the arm of your chair, but never, ever shoved into a pocket. Remember, every piece of silver, china, and linen was a signal of the family's wealth and status, often displayed with a deliberate, sometimes overwhelming, sense of abundance. It was a subtle flexing of financial muscles disguised as hospitality. Think of the tea table itself. It's usually a small round or oval table positioned strategically near the hearth for warmth and for quick access to the heated water. On this table, Lady Ashworth is arranging the implements. The most prominent item is the tea service itself, usually a coordinated set of porcelain, perhaps Wedgwood, or even better, fine Chinese export porcelain if the family was truly established. You notice the tea caddy, an often locked wooden or silver box, indicating the high value placed on the contents within. Tea was expensive, and its handling was a matter of trust and status. A true hostess would never have the tea mixture pre-measured. She would scoop the dried leaves, measuring them by sight and tradition, into the teapot herself. You can almost smell the faint, dry aroma of the leaves, perhaps an expensive Darjeeling or the more common Robusta Assam. She is placing the kettle, often silver, highly polished, sitting on a small stand with a spirit lamp underneath to keep the water simmering. This is one of the most vital, yet often overlooked, pieces of the puzzle. The water must be boiling, not merely hot. The sound of the water being poured, a long, high hiss and gurgle, is one of the most reassuring sounds of the ceremony, a promise of warmth and gentle formality. This act of pouring the water over the leaves in the china teapot, the initial steep, is the precise moment when the entire room seems to hold its breath. It's a moment of silent, collective expectation. The ritual itself, the repetitive motions of the hostess, the gentle steam rising, it's designed to be mesmerizing and, dare I say, boringly perfect. You might be thinking, this is absurdly fussy, and you'd be right. But for the Victorian mind, these rituals were the social mortar that held society together, proof that one was a member of the correct tribe. Refined and civilized, fail to understand the ritual, and you betray your origins as an outsider. So you sit, perfectly still, watching Lady Ashworth perform this elegant, silent ballet of brewing. Your sole task at this point is stillness and appreciation. You are a student of quiet refinement, your movements restricted, your voice silent. The gentle clink of the teaspoon against the fine porcelain cup, the soft hush of the warm water hitting the tea leaves. These small, isolated sounds are your lullaby, drawing you deeper into the quiet, controlled world of the Victorian drawing room. You realize that the absence of hurried movement, the dedication to slow, deliberate, and detailed action, is the true secret to the ceremony's relaxing quality. You are trapped, yes, but you are trapped in a slow motion, beautiful historical moment. You wait, you observe, and you certainly do not offer to help. That would be, perhaps, the most unforgivable sin of all. You are a guest, and a passive one at that. You simply exist, perfectly composed, waiting for the bounty of the perfect cup to be presented to you. The silent preparation, that exquisite torture of waiting, now gives way to the second phase, the presentation. Lady Ashworth, she still hasn't broken her expression of serene, slightly strained concentration, is ready to dispense the tea. Before she does, however, we must pause for a moment to appreciate your own presentation. The rule of thumb for any Victorian social call, especially a formal tea, was to be impeccably, if sometimes stiflingly, dressed. For you, the gentleman caller, that meant a dark frock coat, high collar, and gloves, remember. And for the ladies listening, you would be wearing an afternoon dress, perhaps of silk or fine wool, with a bonnet and, crucially, those gloves. The clothing itself was part of the ritual, a heavy, layered promise of respectability and rigid order. You simply couldn't relax if your stays were too tight or your cravat was too stiff, which, in a way, contributed to the stiff formality of the occasion. The furniture of the drawing room itself mirrored this. Everything was plush, draped, and usually slightly uncomfortable, designed for posture, not repose. Now, let's look at the table and tools. As the hostess begins to pour, your eye should be subtly sweeping over the implements. Everything must gleam. We are talking about the height of the Gilded Age aesthetic, where more was always considered better, especially when it came to silver. Historians still argue whether the complexity of tea implements peaked in the 1880s or 1890s, but what's undeniable is the sheer volume of specialized tools. You might see a tea strainer, often silver, perched over the cup to catch loose leaves. There would be sugar tongs, miniature grappling hooks designed to grasp a lump of sugar without the horrifying offense of touching it with fingers. Forget scooping sugar with a spoon. That's the equivalent of shouting in a library. And then there are the muffin dishes and sandwich trays, usually tiered, allowing the presentation of multiple different delicacies without them touching each other. A culinary caste system on a silver platter. The focus returns to Lady Ashworth and the act of pouring. This is where the china comes into play. The finest cups were invariably thin, almost translucent bone china. This was practical as well as decorative. The thin material helped the heat dissipate quickly, allowing the tea to be drunk more promptly, without scorching the lips. A quirky tidbit about this thin china: many cups, especially earlier ones, didn't have handles. When handles were introduced, they were often small and delicate. The proper technique for holding this newfangled handled cup was a matter of intense social debate. The widely accepted, mildly pretentious method was to cradle the cup in your palm with the thumb and forefinger lightly holding the handle, not to loop your finger through the handle. And whatever you do, do not, under any circumstances, lift your pinky finger in the air. That particular gesture, which modern media often associates with refined sipping, was actually considered an indicator of pretension or vulgarity by the truly no-Victorians. It's a hilarious historical irony that the sign of snobbery today was considered snobbery back then too, just for a different reason. The cups are filled, and Lady Ashworth, without a word, has an attendant hand won to you. You receive it with a minuscule nod. The rules of engagement have begun. Your first task is handling the cup and saucer. The saucer is your shield and your movable table. If you are seated at a low parlor table, you should generally leave the saucer on the table. However, if you are balancing the cup on your knee or standing, you must lift the saucer along with the cup. To lift the cup alone and leave the saucer behind, especially when seated informally, suggests a frantic impatience, a breach of the required serene pace. You are to hold the saucer steadily in your left hand, while gently lifting the cup to your lips with your right. This coordination, this gentle two-handed ballet, is designed to slow you down, to force deliberation into every tiny movement. Now, let's consider the movement itself: sipping. This is not a race. You are not to slurp, nor gulp, nor drain the cup in one hasty go. The sip must be small, almost silent, and delicate. If the tea is too hot, You simply wait. You do not blow on it. Blowing on your tea is the absolute height of vulgar, peasant-like impatience. You wait until the ambient air of the overly decorated drawing room has cooled the liquid sufficiently. This waiting period is a forced moment of calm, a few seconds where you are compelled to do nothing but stare politely into the distance, perhaps admire the elaborate wallpaper, or briefly meet the eye of a fellow guest before quickly retreating. It's a built-in pause button for the perpetually rushed 19th century social calendar. You are sipping history, one tiny, scalding, and impossibly slow swallow at a time. Another subtle, critical element of the table setting was the tea cloth or napkin. You will find a small, beautifully laundered napkin, often embroidered with the family crest, folded neatly beside your cup. You are to immediately unfold it, gently, with no unnecessary snaps or rustling, and place it across your lap. You do not tuck it into your shirt or bodice. It is meant to protect your expensive, heavy garments from stray drops, and simply placing it, there is a quiet acknowledgement of the potential dangers of the ceremony. And when the ritual is complete, and you rise to leave, you will place the crumpled napkin loosely beside your plate, never refolding it. A small, subtle signal that the service is concluded for you. The constant surveillance, remember, every little act tells a story about your upbringing and your self-control. Consider the napkin ring, that peculiar little ornament used in many middle-class homes. While today we might see it as merely decorative, it served a very practical Victorian purpose. Laundry was arduous and expensive. Therefore, a napkin ring was used to keep an individual's personal napkin separate from the rest of the family's, allowing it to be reused multiple times between washes. If you are a guest, you will receive a fresh, clean napkin. But if you are staying with the family, the napkin ring is a quirky marker of your daily integration into the household's economy and routines. It's a small, reassuring detail that your host is both refined and thrifty. You are still holding your cup, the porcelain warm through the thin fabric of your gloves, which, if you were wearing them, you'd have had the good sense to remove before touching the food or drink, remember. Unless they were fingerless gloves, a stylistic choice common for evening wear. The silver spoon now comes into play. It is placed on the saucer when not in use, oriented neatly. Never, ever leave it sticking out of the teacup like a metallic flagpole, tempting fate by risking a catastrophic collision with your nose. When you stir, you do so gently using a back and forth motion from 12 o'clock to 6 o'clock. You do not stir in circles. That is too violent, too reminiscent of churning butter. You certainly do not allow the spoon to clang against the sides of the delicate china. The stirring must be a silent whisper of silver against porcelain. And when you are done, you tap the spoon once, gently, against the inside rim of the cup to dislodge any drops. Then place it back on the saucer, perfectly parallel to the handle. It's a microscopic choreography designed to achieve maximum effect with minimum noise or movement. It is, frankly, boringly beautiful. This level of prescribed action is what makes the whole thing so strangely soporific. You are watching a living, historical machine performing its function perfectly, and predictability is the great sedative. You are safe within the rules. You are holding the cup, the weight of the moment almost as heavy as the porcelain itself. The gentle warmth radiates through the delicate china, And now, the true test of your social competence begins, the pouring protocol. Lady Ashworth, having completed the sacred act of the initial steep, now presents the cups, and a crucial, often terrifying, decision must be made by her and silently endorsed by you, the guest. This decision revolves around the rigid, class-defined, and deeply historical order of adding two simple ingredients, milk and sugar. Forget politics or religion. In a Victorian drawing room, MIF's a milk in first versus TIF tea in first was the fiercest, most revealing social conflict you could encounter. It was the original culture war, fought with tiny teaspoons and high-grade dairy. Let us focus first on the order of milk. Lady Ashworth will not ask you if you take milk. She will observe you. A gentle, quick glance at your expression as the cup is presented tells her everything. The choice, in the most traditional and rigid sense, was dictated by the quality of the china. This is the mainstream historical fact we must internalize. The milk first tradition arose centuries ago when tea, imported from distant lands, was served in far less robust porcelain, often prone to cracking when exposed to the thermal shock of freshly boiled, near scalding water. Adding a splash of room temperature milk first buffered the porcelain, absorbing the initial heat and preventing the expensive cup from shattering. Therefore, if your hostess places the milk before the tea, she is subtly yet unmistakably signaling that her china is of the fine, delicate, and possibly very old variety, vulnerable to the slightest imperfection in temperature control. She is a woman of traditional taste and high-quality possessions. Conversely, if Lady Ashworth pours the tea first, allowing the dark, aromatic liquid to fill the cup to its desired level before offering the milk jug, she is signaling a more modern, robust approach. Her china, often reinforced bone china developed later in the century, is sturdy enough to withstand the heat. She is a woman of modern scientific advancements in ceramics and, perhaps, slightly less rigid adherence to the oldest protocols. To the highly attuned Victorian eye, the order of the pour could silently declare whether the family's wealth was old pre-1850 china, milk first, or new post-1860 bone china, tea first. And you, the guest, are complicit in this silent communication simply by accepting the cup and observing the order. If you were served tea, first in visibly inferior, thick china, you might even be witnessing a mild social critique, a sign that the hostess couldn't quite afford the thin, shatter-prone variety. The entire act is a microscopic transaction of class and ceramics. You must, of course, avoid any sign of surprise or critique regarding the order. You accept the cup as it is given, the weight distributed evenly in your hand. Now, the sugar. The sugar bowl is usually a silver receptacle, sitting beside the milk jug. No fingers, absolutely no fingers. This is where the sugar tongs come into play, those miniature, silver scissors designed specifically for this task. The sound of the tongs clicking against the sugar is one of the definitive ambient noises of the ceremony, a sharp, clean clink that punctuates the quiet hum of the room. You pick up the tongs, an awkward, fiddly action that requires precise control. If you fumble, dropping the lump of sugar onto the saucer, or heavens forbid, onto the table linen, a silent ripple of disapproval will run through the room. Your hostess will not flinch, but her eyebrow might twitch a single, almost imperceptible millimeter. This is the subtle terror of the ceremony, minor failure, major shame. You grasp a single lump, 2 lumps only if you are known to have an aggressively sweet tooth, and 3 lumps only if you are preparing for a forced march across the Siberian steppes. You release the lump gently into the tea, aiming for a clean drop that causes no splash. The lump dissolves slowly, its jagged edges softening into the warm liquid. If you happen to be in a household that still uses sugar in the older, raw loaf form, the vast, white cones that were often kept locked away, your host would have used a special silver implement called a sugar nipper to break off a manageable piece. This is a wonderfully quirky tidbit. The nipper was necessary because sugar, until the mid-19th century, was such an expensive, imported commodity that it arrived as solid, massive cones of processed sweetness. The use of tongs and nippers was a constant, practical reminder of the commodity's rarity and value. It was almost a financial ceremony disguised as tea. Once the milk and sugar are added, or offered. If you politely refuse one or both with a quiet, composed shake of the head, the stirring etiquette takes over. As established briefly before, the stirring action is a crucial performance of control. You must pick up the silver teaspoon with a gentle precision that suggests you are disarming a tiny porcelain bomb. The motion is not rotary. You are not trying to create a swirling whirlpool of despair. Instead, you employ the back and forth movement, a gentle, almost hesitant stirring from the top of the cup, let's say 12 o'clock, to the bottom of 6 o'clock, or more commonly, a side-to-side motion from 9 o'clock to 3 o'clock. It is a slow, silent rocking action, designed only to encourage the sugar to fully integrate without agitating the rest of the liquid. You are essentially teaching the sugar to dissolve through sheer force of gentle will. The most egregious offense in the stirring phase is clanging. If the spoon strikes the sides of the delicate cup with a loud clink, it is proof of your lack of nerve, your hurried impatience, and your general inability to exist gracefully in polite society. You must steer the spoon with the controlled expertise of a surgeon navigating a very small pond. The ideal sound of stirring is no sound at all, or perhaps the faintest, softest hush of liquid displacing liquid. If you hear a clatter, you have failed the auditory portion of the tea exam. You are now the boorish interloper, who cannot manage the simple physics of a ceramic cup. When you judge the sugar to be perfectly integrated, and you must only judge this by the time elapsed, as you certainly cannot stop to inspect the bottom of the cup. The spoon must be removed and placed precisely. You tap the spoon once against the inside edge of the cup, a small, quiet action to shake off any remaining drops. Then, you place it on the saucer, perfectly parallel to the handle of the cup. The handle, the cup, and the spoon form a small, neat alignment, a geometric promise of order and stability. Never, ever, rest the spoon against the side of the cup inside or outside, where it might slip and cause a distracting metallic crash. Every object must know its place, and your job is to enforce that placidity. This meticulous, controlled placement is part of the somniferous quality of the ritual. It reassures the brain that nothing is out of place, nothing is unpredictable. Now, a brief consideration of the highly refined art of refusal. Let's say Lady Ashworth, with her silent, knowing gaze, offers you a second cup. This is an offer of continued favor, a gentle suggestion that your presence is still welcome. You should accept the second cup, as it is the polite expectation. You do not, however, simply present your cup. You must wait for the hostess to ask, "May I offer you more tea?" or some similar phrasing. And here is where the open scholarly debate comes in. Historians still argue whether accepting a third cup was universally considered greedy, or if it was regionally dependent. In most high society London circles, the rule of two was generally observed. Accepting a third cup risked being interpreted as an attempt to loiter, an imposition on the hostess's time, or simply a sign of excessive thirst, a most unrefined trait. Better to politely decline the third cup with a quiet, "Thank you, ma'am," but that was quite sufficient, or a similarly restrained phrasing. The subtle movements continue. You are compelled to hold this tiny, warm vessel, taking small, measured sips. If you need to set the cup down, perhaps to engage in the allowed conversation. We'll get to that in the next section. Don't rush. You return it to the saucer. Never on the bare table. Always on the saucer, maintaining that protective separation. The saucer is the cup's chaperone, and they must never be separated in public. Even the act of bringing the cup to your lips must be regulated. The movement is straight up, straight down. No grand swooping motions, no tilting of the head to meet the cup. The cup comes to your lips. Your head remains level, and the sip is brief and utterly silent. The sheer amount of cognitive energy required to manage this miniature performance is what makes the whole exercise so draining, and ultimately so relaxing when you simply give up trying to be perfect and let the slow, rhythmic repetition wash over you. The only thing you are truly allowed to express is a quiet, composed state of appreciative stillness. The tea is doing the work. You are merely the beautifully dressed recipient. The tea is now brewed, poured, sweetened, and sitting perfectly aligned on its saucer. You have successfully navigated the ceramic minefield of the first 3 sections. Now, you must face the equally rigorous demands of food and conversation: scones, sandwiches, and silence. The drawing-room attendant, or perhaps Lady Ashworth herself, in a gesture of intimate informality, presents the tiered serving tray. This tray, usually silver, is a silent map of the ceremony's culinary structure, and you must understand its hierarchy to avoid appearing utterly clueless. The tray's structure is crucial. On the lowest tier, you will typically find the most substantial savory items, small, crustless sandwiches. On the middle tier sit the warmer, often dovier items, specifically the scones or possibly crumpets, accompanied by clotted cream and jam. And on the highest tier are the delicate, small, sugary pastries and cakes, the ultimate sweet finale. This order is not decorative, it is the prescribed order of consumption. You must begin with the savory, progress to the bread and cream, and conclude with the sweet. To reverse this order is to declare your lack of culinary sophistication, prioritizing frivolous sugar over structured savory courses. It's a small detail, but a major social failure. Let's start with the sandwiches. They are always small, cut into dainty triangles or, more classically, tiny rectangles called fingers. Crucially, they are crustless. The removal of the crust was not just for aesthetics. It was a deliberate waste of bread, a subtle signal that the host could afford such extravagance. It's a very mild, cheeky form of wealth display. You pick up the sandwich using only your fingers, no fork, as these are considered finger foods, and you must eat it in 2 or, ideally, 3 tiny bites. This is not lunch, it is a tasting, a gentle, brief interruption to the serious business of social observation. The most popular fillings were cucumber, thinly sliced, often salted and drained, or perhaps smoked salmon, or egg and cress. Whatever the filling, it must be light, and it must not drip or require excessive chewing. You are aiming for quiet, dignified mastication. Anything that forces you to open your mouth too wide, or heaven forbid, make a crunching noise, is immediately disqualified. Next, the scones. These are perhaps the most famous and most socially dangerous element of the tea ceremony. You pick up a scone from the middle tier. You must use a small knife, never your fingers, to split the scone horizontally. Now, a fresh wave of anxiety washes over you, because you are about to encounter the most enduring and still ongoing scholarly debate of the tea world: jam or cream first. Historians and descendants of the Victorian elite still argue whether the Devonshire method, cream first, then jam, or the Cornish method, jam first, then cream, was the socially superior approach in London drawing rooms. The rule you must follow is one of moderation and control. Whichever order you choose, you must apply the cream and jam only to the small piece you are about to eat, using the small knife to transfer them from the communal dish to your plate, then from your plate to the scone. You do not slather the entire scone in advance. You are applying a thin, controlled layer for the immediate bite. The entire process, split, plate, apply, bite, must be executed with a quiet, smooth, unhurried grace that suggests you have a leisurely relationship with time and pastry. Remember, the knives and forks provided for the scones and cakes are typically small, almost miniature, silver implements. This is not because Victorian hands were smaller, it is because the food portions were small and the tools were designed to reinforce the dainty, controlled movements required. You must not use the knife to butter the scone aggressively, but to gently spread the jam and cream. The entire act is a testament to delicate, non-committal consumption. Finally, the cakes and pastries on the top tier. These are the sweet reward, often miniature fruit tarts, petit fours, or perhaps a slice of light sponge cake. They are designed to be eaten in 2 bites, and often with a very small fork, if provided, or simply by hand if they are sturdy enough. The primary rule here is simplicity and lack of mess. No powdered sugar dustings, no gooey centers, and certainly no chocolate, which was still considered mildly vulgar for formal afternoon settings until later in the century. The entire food phase is meant to be a delicate scaffolding for the real purpose of the gathering conversation. And this brings us to the silence and small talk. You've been mostly silent, observing the ritual, but now, as the food begins to circulate, the noise level must increase, but only slightly. The conversation during a Victorian tea ceremony was perhaps the most boring, most frustratingly low-stakes verbal exchange ever devised. The key rule is avoid anything serious. Forget politics, religion, high finance, or genuine, heartfelt personal concerns. Those are for private moments or the gentleman's club. The entire purpose of this low-stakes conversation is to allow you to speak without revealing any truly compromising or passionate parts of your personality. You must not dominate the conversation. You must not interrupt. And you absolutely must not laugh loudly. The voice should be kept at a gentle, composed murmur, a subtle hum that blends into the background noise of the clinking china and the fireplace. Historians still argue whether this constrained conversation was a sign of emotional repression or a highly evolved form of social discipline. But for you, the guest, it is simply a rule: be blandly charming. If you are a gentleman and the conversation flags, you might subtly admire a piece of art or furniture in the room. This gives the hostess a chance to offer a gentle, equally bland story about its acquisition. For example, you might admire a slightly clumsy statue of a dog. Lady Ashworth replies, "Yes, dear Lord Ashworth acquired that from a rather dusty shop near the docks. A surprisingly heavy piece, isn't it?" This keeps the conversational ball rolling, gently, slowly, requiring no emotional investment whatsoever. It is verbal white noise, designed to be soothing and predictable, much like a historical ASMR track. The combination of the rhythmic sipping, the gentle clink of the spoon, the tiny bites of food, and the soft, meaningless murmur of polite words is what makes this entire ritual the ultimate historical sleep aid. Your brain, deprived of any conflict or surprise, simply begins to shut down, reassured by the absolute, unwavering certainty of the rules. You are trapped in an overly decorated room, forced to move slowly, speak softly, and think about nothing more stressful than the possibility of jam on top or cream on top. It's truly a bore, and beautifully so. You are merely existing, observing the quiet perfection of the Victorian social machine, the gentle hum of small talk about the new town clock, or the quality of the recent harvest, has lasted for 45 minutes. You have successfully consumed a crustless finger sandwich, half a scone jam on top, because you are a sensible person, and 2 cups of perfectly acceptable Darjeeling. Now, the final, most delicate stage of the ceremony must begins: dismissal and departure, exiting the social labyrinth. This isn't a modern gathering where you can simply stand up and yell, "Gotta run." The departure must be as subtle and meticulously managed as the arrival. You are not dismissed by the hostess. You must dismiss yourself, but only after the correct social signals have been deployed. The first signal is physical: the cup and saucer. When you decide that the appropriate amount of time has elapsed, never less than 30 minutes, rarely more than an hour, unless specifically invited for an extended stay, you must subtly signal that you are finished. The universally accepted quiet sign is to take your teaspoon, the one that was resting parallel to the handle, and place it across the top of your teacup. It's a tiny, metallic bridge spanning the porcelain rim. This small, silent rearrangement broadcasts your completion to the entire room, particularly to the hostess and any attending servants, without a single word being uttered. It's the Victorian equivalent of sending a polite text message: "I am complete, preparing for extraction." The second signal is verbal, and it must be done with great care. You are not to simply stand up. You must wait for a brief, natural pause in the conversation. Perhaps after Lady Ashworth finishes a gentle anecdote about her nephew's pony. You then turn, not to the hostess, but to the person nearest you, and offer a quiet, gracious, non-committal concluding phrase. Something like, "Well, I must say, the afternoon has passed in the most agreeable fashion," or "I have truly enjoyed the pleasure of your company today." The emphasis is on the past tense and the general politeness. This prepares your immediate vicinity for your impending movement without directly pressuring the hostess. Now, you turn to Lady Ashworth herself. The phrase must be simple, direct, and slightly apologetic. implying that the outside world is rudely demanding your attention, not that her company is anything less than perfection. You might say, with a brief, charming smile, "Lady Ashworth, I fear I have taken up quite enough of your time. Thank you so much for your generous hospitality." You must not state where you are going next, nor mention any actual appointments. That would be vulgar boasting about your schedule. You merely imply that duty calls. At this point, you stand up smoothly, without bumping the delicate parlor table, or allowing the skirt of your coat to snag on any of the ornate furniture. This is where you address the other guests, offering a quiet, almost whispered general farewell. "Good day, everyone," or "Until our next meeting. Remember the napkin, the one you unfolded with such care and placed in your lap. Now is the time for its final, subtle act. You stand, and you must place the napkin loosely beside your teacup and plate. You do not fold it back up. That would suggest the napkin is clean enough to reuse for the next guest, which is a mild insult to the hostess's hospitality and the household's budget. Leaving it casually crumpled is a quiet guarantee that it is finished and destined for the wash. Lady Ashworth will now perform her final act of gracie. She will rise to accompany you to the door of the drawing room. This is a crucial mainstream historical fact. The hostess should always accompany the departing guest from the drawing room to the outer door of the house, or at least the hall. To allow a guest to wander off alone was considered negligent and rude, a sign that the hostess was eager to be rid of them. The walk is slow and composed. This short journey through the hall is your final opportunity for quiet, appreciative small talk. A final chance to cement the good impression. You might quietly praise a detail of the architecture, or comment gently on the beautiful light streaming in through the glasswork. You reach the front door. This is the moment for the final, sincere lels or sincerely acted handshake, or, for ladies, a slight dip of the head. You will thank Lady Ashworth once more for the charming time. You retrieve your top hat and gloves, which were placed neatly on the hall table or presented by an attendant. And then, without lingering for an awkward final exchange, you exit. You turn and walk away briskly, but not frantically. You do not look back. To look back is to signal a lack of resolve or worse, a lingering, needy dependence on the hostess's continued attention. You simply walk on, carrying the quiet, slightly exhausted satisfaction of having successfully performed a flawless social ritual. The entire ceremony, from the precise timing of your arrival to the deliberate, final unfolding of the crumpled napkin, was a single, unified performance designed to reassure the participants of their status, their gentility, and their total command over the chaos of the outside world. It was a perfectly boring, perfectly detailed performance of order. The quiet clink of the silver, the soft hiss of the lamp under the kettle, the whispered, non-committal chatter, all of it conspired to create a zone of low stress, high formality predictability. And that predictability, that boring, unwavering routine, is what makes the Victorian tea ceremony the ultimate historical sedative. You spent an hour being forced to slow down, to speak softly, to think only of tiny sandwiches and the correct placement of a silver spoon. Your mind was not allowed to race, your body not allowed to rush. The subtle aftermath of the visit is just as important. For the hostess, there is the immediate survey of the wreckage, ensuring the silver is counted and cleaned, The fine china is safely stored, and that your social impression was a favorable one. For you, the departing guest, there is a strange lightness, a mild, physical release from the constraints of the starched collar and the stiff posture. You have been gently massaged by the rigors of etiquette, and now you are free to trudge back into the louder, faster, less defined world, carrying with you the soothing memory of the drawing room's quiet control. You survived the ritual, you adhered to the rules, and you are now safe, composed, and perhaps just a little bit sleepy. The weight of the world fades as the memory of the precise, slow movement of the spoon against the porcelain takes over. Now, let the hum of the Victorian drawing room fade, dissolving like sugar into a cooling cup. You've done enough. The rules are gone, the silver is safely stored, and the only sound now is the quiet settling of the house around you. Feel the tension leaving your shoulders, those shoulders that were held so rigidly straight for the hostess. Let your head sink deeper into your pillow. There are no more rules, no more pinky fingers to worry about, no more sandwiches to eat in tiny, discreet bites. Just the easy rhythm of your own breath, slowing and deepening. The meticulous world of 19th century etiquette is miles away, dissolved into the comfortable darkness. Close your eyes, let the soft sounds carry you, and know that you are safe here, still and entirely welcome in the quiet. The night is yours now, unhurried, unscheduled, and wonderfully, perfectly silent.